things down when I'm talking to him, and he really made me feel uncomfortable. And he goes, "You seem oddly familiar." And I go, "Oh God, what is it?" He says, I know you. I've known you somewhere. And I said, "No, I don't think so." He goes, "Well, where did you grow up?" I said, "Well, I grew up in California." He goes, "Where in California?" I go, "Well, you would know where this place was. It's out near Palm Springs." And he goes, "Where in Palm Springs?" "Where near Palm?" I said, "Well, a place called Landers out of Giant Rock." And he goes, and then of course and I'm in the middle of a presentation, completely not related. He goes, "Did you ever know a man named George Van Tassel?" And of course, I'm sitting there talking, to this group of people, and so from then on, he obviously had a lot of, weight within their whole thing. We were talking about free energy, talking about spaceships, talking about my uncle, talking about my uncle's involved with space and time travel. Built this machine called the Integratron out there in the middle of nowhere. Had done a lot of research. And so he was well connected. My uncle was well connected. And this guy says, "Listen," he grabbed me by the arm. He says, "I would not be doing this if it weren't for your uncle." He says, "I was, in fact," he says, "when I first met him, I was an undergraduate." He says, "But I until I met him, through the conversation about this, and of course he was a full-blown rocket scientist. He goes, I would have never done that." He says, So obviously, one thing I do feel good about my uncle, and I have a certain amount of reverence for him because he did influence a lot of people to go in various areas, even though he was considered fringe, rogue, and what have you by some people, so.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little story, and then we can get more into this. Years ago, I met a guy with one of the businesses I had, too, while I was in broadcasting. I had a side business selling electronics. I got to know this one guy, and I didn't know what his job was. I knew he worked at Republic Airlines, and then one day, I don't know what it was, we had a lot of time, and we were talking, and I found out he was a vice president of Republic Airlines. I don't know if you remember Republic Airlines. They were a big airline. Yeah, and, they went bankrupt. But we were talking. I said, okay. Yeah. And he was telling me about his military. He was a pilot, flew B-52s. And he was telling me about a story. He went to drop what he called eggs over in North Vietnam and then, head back to Guam. And he said that one time he looked out of his cockpit, side window, and there was a UFO right off his wing. And he said everybody in the B-52, all the crew saw it. And he said his biggest mistake he ever made was to radio that in. And he said he radioed that in. And when he went to land, he was instructed not to even get out of the plane to, whatever. And they put a whole bunch of, I guess, military police came around, surrounded the B-52. They escorted him into a building and separated his whole crew. And then, basically tried brainwashing the crew that, no, you didn't see a UFO. If you want to, stay in the military, because a lot of the guys wanted to stay in the military, sure. And you have to sign this document saying that you can never disclose whatever you didn't see. And, he even told me pilots, even with Republic Airlines, there was one that made a mistake and opened their mouth. They lost their job instantly. And, he advised all the pilots, if you do see a UFO, don't radio it in, don't put it in the logbook. It never happened.
Yep. That's precisely, that was the procedure, and for many, it's interesting you bring it up because, I'm trying to basically give kind of an analogy as far as who I was. I always refer to myself as a rabbit looking at regular people. As far as that, I was just a little out of place as far as that. But my uncle had a restaurant out at the Rock, and I would see military planes there, and I'd often see military men and other people which I knew were in aviation. They were all sitting around drinking coffee and in there. And I never really figured out. In fact, actually, I didn't get this until Gabriel Green told me what that was about. I really didn't know what that was. I couldn't figure out what all their helicopters, what all these military planes and everything was out there, and who were these people, and why was my uncle sitting in the middle of them? Why was he sitting there with these people? Okay, it didn't make any sense because, nothing made sense back then. Well, I found out through Gabriel Green. He told me, he says, yeah. He says people with, military and pilots had nowhere to go with their story, had no way to process the information. And some people got severe psychological issues as far as not only seeing and having their world turned upside down, but not being able to talk about it. It literally was causing them a lot of problems. So where would you go? Well, where they went is they went and saw my Uncle George, and he would always, take time and talk to him because he was right at the, like I said, at the epicenter of all of this UFO stuff. And so consequently, that's what he was doing. He was essentially the UFO counselor. I mean, or the contactee counselor, and that's what they were doing out there. But again, like a lot of things, I'm sitting there. We're living with my grandmother out there, and a small cabin, little halfway, half brick, half house, kind of a hodgepodge type thing, and every once a year there'd be a cloud of dust. And back in the day, the roads weren't paved, so I'd see all this, car after car, truck after truck, planes flying in. I mean, literally everything complete. You got to remember that I probably, was within 50 people in a 50-mile radius. 364 days, and then one day everyone shows up. From my eyes, it was so spectacular just to see the activity. And then, of course, I got to go over there and walk through the various crowds that were there. And some years they got up to 10,000 people. So
up to 10,000?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 10,000 people. Yeah. So from that perspective, everything was kind of out of place. But I agree with you. The last thing that you wanted to do was report a UFO if you're a pilot, because it would be the end of your career, and which is such a shame because, well, that's the world we live in. It's starting to loosen up supposedly. This Nimitz.
Okay, I hope we didn't lose him, James.
I know there he is.
Yeah.
Okay, you're back.
I hope I didn't get faded out here.
No, you dropped out for a second, but you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned Nimitz.
Yeah, the Tic Tac, the Nimitz. Yeah. So seem to be loosening up, and in fact, you can go on YouTube and talk to some of the Nimitz, Navy personnel that experienced the radar guys and the various pilots that experienced that. And so, but again, it happened in 2004. And so, or roughly there, and of course now it's 2019.
Yeah, but Chad,
but now
this is strange though, Chad. And the reason why I'm saying this, okay, it only came out, less than a year ago about, all of a sudden the news started showing this video of, these two fighter pilots, Navy pilots off the Nimitz chasing a UFO. And then after that appeared, then we all of a sudden had the Secretary of the Air Force talking to the graduates, and telling them, the next war, you better be prepared for it, will not be a ground war. It's going to be in outer space. And then, 2 months after that, you have the president joking, well, we should create a space force. And then, lo and behold, I guess they got something. I think we've already had a space force for a long time, but they actually now created a space force. I'm just thinking something is up because, some of the reports I get, Chad, from, people about UFOs, you get a lot of people say the UFOs they're friendly, they're here to help man, but they don't really do anything to, they're not stopping Antarctica from melting. They're not stopping us from pollution. They're not stopping the killing that's been going on for years and years and years. But then you get people like Calvin Parker. His experience, he said, was very negative being abducted, that him and his friend were taken off a dock where they were fishing. He was brought on a UFO, and whatever alien or whatever it was that abducted him was trying to put her fingers down his throat and come out all the way out of his nose. and the way he was treated with like shock pain, to like disable him. And then, I've had other people saying the same thing. Like one guy claims that he was abducted and they, were removing sperm from him. I've had women on my show that claim they were abducted and had eggs removed from them. If we went out down the street, right, and abducted somebody and brought them to our house and did any of that stuff, you'd be in prison for the rest of your life and labeled the biggest nut in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. There is, they are, this prime directive that I've, heard in the various circles where they're not supposed to do it. I think there's some rogue agents in there. Also, too, I think there's some species that are literally, they're desperate, as far as to continue. And I think that's why you get the sperm and the eggs to, do hybrids, with them to see what they could do. They're literally, one of the things that, when you talk about the Nephilian, race of people, supposedly they were spread all over they could live for a certain amount of years, but they couldn't procreate. And and they were supposedly the giants that were running around here. So that whole precedent, as far as whenever you get a hybrid kind of, I guess, what is it, the horse and mule, jackass, syndrome, where you can't do that. But I think there are some real desperate races out there that are, high in technology but low in this other thing, and they're desperately trying to do something. So that would be my take on it. And I'm not making any excuses. And I'm in the same camp, and I know with my own abduction experience, it was not pleasant. It was horrifying. I was too young, didn't understand it, and I felt there were metal and steel probes going up in all kinds of orifices. And then the deception type thing, as far as I was, they told me that I would never ever remember this, and that I should just relax. But it was the most terrifying episode that stayed with me for to this day. However, from that, I'm here, and I wasn't, at least I was psychologically traumatized, but I wasn't, they didn't eat me, as far as that. And there are supposedly 105 different species of extraterrestrials, and that was via my uncle. And I recently saw something from the Soviet Union, an old manuscript, as far as where they had identified 105 different species, and I imagine there's probably more. As far as that, and then you hear about some of these species of extraterrestrials that actually are, they're cannibalistic. They actually are, they're carnivores, I guess. They literally, I've heard that the reptilians like to eat people, So yeah, but I've never met a reptilian. I was asked one time, and I don't know a lot about that. But there are these other different, like there's different species that are a lot more friendlier, I guess. But like everything in nature, you have good and bad. And but as far as taking over this thing, I think that's where it will really get very interesting, because I think we're being watched by a whole slew of very powerful extraterrestrial races, and I think that if that were to occur, like an actual invasion, I think that there would be. I think you talk about Star Wars or Space Wars or whatever. I think that's when you'd have it then, because I think that we do have benefactors, and we have a long history of benefactors in this planet. And there's a great interest in this planet here, because when you see the UFO activity, they're after a lot of the mineralization. And case in point, the Anunnaki was after gold, but there's other minerals that this planet has and holds that seem to be essential, and they seem to come here to harvest that too for some reason. So again, we're not going to know until we know, Gary. That's the other thing too. As far as you're talking about the diabolical intent, that's been going on since Dwight Eisenhower. Ronald Reagan talked about having Star Wars. Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan had a UFO dog them from Sacramento when he was governor, and told everyone at a party at Lucille Ball's that they had actually seen and come in